This lesson provides an overview of work folders. Work folders is a new feature in Windows Server 2012 R2 that's focused around providing access for non-corporate devices to a specific folder in the enterprise infrastructure. This work folder is then synchronized with that device and available offline. A useful scenario would be something like a user's home folder. Now, traditionally, we could use technologies such as offline files, client-side caching with folder redirection. This would enable the user's home drive to also be cached locally on a domain-joined machine. But today we face scenarios where users have multiple devices. They may wish to use personal devices to access corporate resources. And so work folders is positioned to give those non-corporate assets the ability to synchronize with a location in the corporate infrastructure and have it available offline. Now, I've already mentioned offline files, but there are other technologies to consider. For example, OneDrive for Business, formerly known as SkyDrive Pro. This uses SharePoint as a backend and is a very powerful technology for structured data, for example, Word documents and PowerPoint documents, to be stored centrally in the organization, but also available offline. Then there are technologies such as OneDrive, formerly known as SkyDrive, for personal data. But you don't want users storing corporate data on a personal type storage medium. And so work folders bridges that gap where it's not a domain joined asset, so it can't use folder redirection and offline files, but it doesn't want to use data such as SkyDrive or OneDrive, which should really only be for their personal data. So this is extending existing data on a file server, not something like SharePoint, and is caching it locally. It uses SSL encryption for all of the data sent over the wire, so it only requires port 443 HTTPS. Now, there is a certificate requirement which I will talk through in more detail later in this lesson. In addition to synchronizing this single folder, basic policies can be configured on the end device using the ActiveSync type technology. This enables a certain level of encryption, a certain pin length, a certain lockout set of requirements, and also that data that's stored on the device can be remote wiped. If you want additional controls on the data such as quoting or types of data, you would use existing resources such as the File Server Resource Manager to enforce quotas or real-time file screening. At the current time, the clients that are supported to communicate to this work folder are Windows 8.1 and Windows RT 8.1. Although there are plans to introduce clients for Windows 7, iOS, Android, and potentially even other platforms, but these aren't set in stone or confirmed at this time. It is important to realize that in the 2012 R2 and the Windows 8.1 release, you can only synchronize a certain folder and all the subfolders under it. So a single device cannot use work folders to synchronize from many different folders. It cannot selectively pick what it wants to synchronize. It's all or nothing. And when it does synchronize changes, it synchronizes the entire file. It doesn't do delta-based changes to a file. So if I have a 10 megabyte file and that file changes but only 10K has changed, it would still replicate the entire size of that file. It is important to also point out what work folders is not. It is not a service for consumers. That is where SkyDrive, OneDrive fits in. This is not a public cloud service. This is not hosted by Microsoft. The data is stored in a file share in your organization, your file services. And I should point out, if you already have file servers and they're hosting users' home folders, for example, you can absolutely use the same share to synchronize through their home folder, sort of folder redirection, and also for work folders. This is not a collaboration solution. Each user has to have their own share that is assigned for work folders. Multiple users, for example groups, cannot use the same share. This is user-level synchronization. It's not a sync solution for any data within the organization. It is only one share to be synchronized for work folders. So really, I'd look at this as a last-ditch technology. If I cannot use OneDrive or SkyDrive, if I cannot use OneDrive for Business, SkyDrive Pro, if I cannot use folder redirections, then I would look at leveraging work folders. So this does not use SMB, does not use client-side caching. It is its own protocol over 443, and it's very important from a usability standpoint. Do not deliver to a user data using folder redirection and using work folders, because they would see the data twice. and they would believe they have 2 copies of the data and would potentially delete one of them. Well, it actually would sync back to the same point and then delete all of the data. So only pick one of them, either use client-side caching or work folders on a single device. Again, typically, you wouldn't use work folders anyway, you would use client-side caching. Remember, this is synchronizing the entire folder structure. No selective sync is currently available. And the way this works behind the scenes is every 10 minutes, the work folder client will poll the server to look for any changes, any new data. And the goal of this is to minimize the drain on the battery, especially for mobile devices. There is also a Sync Now option in Explorer, or there is a separate work folders control panel applet. If you look at the properties of a file that's been synchronized, it will tell you when it was last synchronized. Now, there is both a client-side database and there is a server-side database that tracks the synchronization. If there is any corruption, both of them will rebuild automatically. So there really shouldn't be any time you have to manually do anything on the client. On the server side, there is a PowerShell commandlet, repair sync share, that will force a repair. If you do enable the security policy for work folders, it sets a minimum password length of 6, the auto lock at 15 minutes, and a minimum password retry of 10. Obviously, this is a very lenient policy, and you cannot modify this. But the goal is this is at least something. If you had another policy applied to the same device, such as through Exchange or Office 365, then the stricter policy would be enforced. So this is just giving you at least something via work folders.